Welcome back to QHSE Talks. When you analyze the CSP Blueprint with professional seriousness, Domain 2, Management Systems, emerges as one of the most structurally demanding areas of the certification framework. This domain does not test whether you can define safety terminology. It evaluates whether you can control an organizational system through structured oversight, measurable objectives, and disciplined accountability. Domain 2 requires competency in establishing benchmarks and evaluating performance against defined standards. It expects a working knowledge of leading and lagging indicators, not just their definitions, but their strategic application. It demands familiarity with EHS management systems and audit methodologies. It examines leadership principles tied directly to authority, responsibility, and accountability within organizational hierarchies. These elements are interconnected. A benchmark without measurement is meaningless. An indicator without interpretation has no value. An audit without corrective action provides false assurance. Accountability without quantifiable expectations becomes subjective. The blueprint's emphasis is deliberate. It recognizes that safety performance cannot be sustained through documentation alone. A written program, regardless of its sophistication, does not demonstrate effectiveness. Organizational charts do not prove control. Training records do not guarantee behavior. Even regulatory compliance does not confirm capability. What confirms capability is performance data. Performance data that shows whether risk control systems are functioning as intended, data that reflects whether supervisors are executing assigned safety responsibilities, metrics that indicate whether employees are engaging in hazard reporting and protective behaviors, audits that evaluate not only compliance, but system adequacy and resource sufficiency. Domain 2 implicitly asks a critical question. Can you prove your system works? This question shifts safety management from philosophical commitment to operational verification. Measurement creates visibility. Visibility enables intervention. Intervention sustains control. Without structured measurement, management decisions rely on anecdotal feedback. Without defined indicators, emerging risk trends remain hidden. Without periodic evaluation, corrective actions lose urgency. Over time, that absence of oversight allows degradation to occur silently. The CSP framework anticipates this vulnerability. That is why it places strategic emphasis on indicators, benchmarks, and audit systems. It expects the professional to understand how to build smart objectives, how to interpret statistical trends responsibly, and how to differentiate between reactive metrics and predictive signals. Lagging indicators may reveal that harm has already occurred. Leading indicators, when designed correctly, provide early warning that the system requires adjustment. Both have value, but only when integrated into a coherent management structure. The essence of Domain 2 is disciplined oversight. It is the structured evaluation of management arrangements, risk control systems, and workplace precautions. It is the translation of policy into measurable performance. It is the transformation of accountability from verbal expectation to quantifiable obligation. And that structured, measurable, system-based approach to safety management brings us directly to one of the most operationally decisive chapters in the entire framework of professional safety leadership.
Chapter 36 of Yates's text, titled Measuring Safety and Health Performance.
I know you have a relentless enthusiasm for this particular topic.
I really do, because measuring safety is the mechanism that tangibly saves lives. The administrative-sounding task of measuring performance.
It sounds so dry, doesn't it?
It sounds incredibly dry, but it is the literal dividing line between a safety program that exists as a dusty 2-inch binder sitting on a site manager's shelf and a dynamic safety program that ensures every single worker walks out the gate to their families at the end of a shift.
Framing it as the dividing line is completely accurate. You cannot engineer safety into a facility through good intentions alone.
And you certainly cannot ensure it by simply demanding compliance.
No, you can't. The Safety Professionals Reference and Study Guide makes it explicitly clear that an overarching, structured, and constantly measured system is required.
So let's look at the CSP Blueprint domains to see the sheer breadth of what a safety professional must control. It's staggering.
Domain 1 alone constitutes 25% of the entire certification exam.
25%? That's a huge chunk.
It is, and it focuses heavily on the advanced application of safety principles. It expects you to be an expert in minimizing hazards using prevention through design methodologies.
Right, evaluating avoidance, elimination, and substitution long before a facility is even built.
Exactly. It requires a deep understanding of process safety principles, calculating pressure relief systems, and analyzing chemical compatibility matrices.
The technical demand there is massive. It expects the professional to evaluate highly lethal workplace hazards. We're talking electrical arc, flash dangers, confined space atmospheric hazards.
Complex lockout-tagout procedures involving multiple energy sources like pneumatic, hydraulic, and thermal energy.
And it pushes even further into evaluating facility life safety features, fire suppression systems, public space occupancy loads.
It even covers fleet safety principles involving telematics and the biomechanics of driver fatigue.
And then another 25% of the blueprint shifts entirely to Domain 2, which is program management.
This is where we transition from engineering to organizational behavior. It requires comparing performance against established benchmarks, conducting rigorous gap analyses, calculating EHS culture metrics, and executing a flawless management of change process.
So why are those two domains so inextricably linked?
Because managing biological hazards, understanding the intense physics of a fall as regulated by OSHA's Subpart M, or calculating the volumetric airflow for a local exhaust ventilation system.
They all share common vulnerability.
Right. Yes, they require a structured system of management to survive contact with reality.
That is perfectly stated. Survive contact with reality.
An organization can invest millions of dollars in the most brilliant engineering controls or purchase the highest-end powered air purifying respirators on the market.
But without a systemic management framework to measure their ongoing efficacy, those controls will inevitably degrade and fail.
Right. Having a beautifully written hazard communication policy that perfectly mirrors the requirements of 29 CFR 1910.1200 means absolutely nothing if you have no mechanism to verify its real-world application.
You can't just throw safety protocols into the organizational ether and hope they take root.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that operational friction is precisely why Chapter 36 serves as the central nervous system of a mature safety program.
Measuring the performance of the entire safety management system is the only way to verify reality.
Measurement is how you prove that the hazard communication training actually resulted in a non-English speaking employee understanding the chronic toxicity warnings on a safety data sheet.
It's the only way to verify that your lockout-tagout devices aren't just sitting pristine in a maintenance toolbox, but are actively isolating hazardous energy on the production floor.
Operating without measurement means operating on assumptions. And in high-hazard industries, assumptions are the precursors to catastrophic events.
Which brings us directly into the philosophy of accountability. Yates establishes this as the bedrock of Chapter 36.
He leans heavily on a famous management principle by Peter Drucker.
Ah, yes, the Drucker principle. You can't manage what you can't measure.
It's a classic for a reason.
It is. Think about it like trying to lose weight without ever stepping on a scale or tracking your calories. You're just guessing. If you're an EHS manager sitting at your desk right now, staring at a spreadsheet of incident rates and wondering why you still feel this baseline anxiety about the plant floor,
It is usually because you are managing the aftermath, not measuring the process.
let's delve into why that anxiety exists. The text references the OSHA Safety and Health Management Systems e-tool to break down a critical legal and operational distinction.
And this distinction frequently gets blurred in corporate environments. It's the difference between responsibility, authority, and accountability.
This is a vital conceptual framework for you, especially if you're advising C-suite executives or preparing for the rigor of the CSP exam.
Those three terms are constantly weaponized in post-incident investigations, often used interchangeably, which creates massive organizational confusion.
But they mean very different things when the regulatory agencies or civil litigators arrive, don't they?
They absolutely do. Supervisors, line managers, and safety coordinators carry responsibility. It is their contractual job to execute tasks.
Like conducting daily pre-shift inspections or delivering targeted toolbox talks or verifying hot work permits.
Right. Alongside that, they're granted authority. They possess the organizational power to stop a production line if they identify an immediately dangerous to life or health condition.
Or the power to enforce disciplinary action for a bypassed machine guard.
However, the business owner, the facility operator, or the chief executive holds the overall accountability.
The buck stops there.
Exactly. When a catastrophic failure occurs, accountability dictates who answers for the systemic collapse. They are the ones legally and morally holding the bag, regardless of whether they were personally on the floor that day.
So if the top executive holds ultimate accountability, relying solely on a localized supervisor's responsibility is a massive blind spot.
It's a huge liability. The executive absolutely must establish a systemic measurement tool to verify that the people holding responsibility and authority are actually executing.
Which integrates perfectly into the foundational management theory presented in the text, the Deming cycle.
Also widely known as the PDCA model.
Right. Plan, do, check, act. It is drilled into every management professional's head.
But what Yates's guide points out is that safety professionals historically obsess over the plan and the do, and completely neglect the check phase.
Let's recontextualize this specifically for Chapter 36. Walk us through it.
The plan phase is where you establish your CapEx and OpEx budgets, define objectives, and design processes to deliver results aligned with the corporate health and safety policy.
You're utilizing tools like a hazard and operability study, a HAZOP, to identify risks and engineer controls.
Then the organization moves to the do phase, the capital is spent, the training matrix is rolled out, the light curtains are wired into the stamping presses.
A hazardous waste manifest are signed, the new dilution ventilation system is powered on.
And this is where the organization feels a false sense of security, because money was spent and actions were taken.
But that false security is exactly what measurement aims to destroy. The third phase, check, is where Chapter 36 lives.
Measuring performance is the check. It forces the organization to assess the actual processes against the theoretical policy.
It demands an answer to a really harsh question. Did the massive capital expenditure and training rollout in the do phase actually mitigate the risk we identified in the plan phase?
And finally, the act phase. This requires taking remedial action based strictly on the empirical data gathered during the check phase.
So if the measurements show the light curtains are being routinely bypassed by operators to hit production quotas, you act to redesign the workflow or enforce the policy.
Or if the measurements show the ventilation system is successfully maintaining volatile organic compounds below the permissible exposure limit, you act to standardize that preventative maintenance schedule across the company.
Chapter 36 expands significantly on why this specific data is gathered. It is not an academic exercise to generate vanity metrics for an annual ESG report.
Not at all. The primary purpose is to arm decision makers with reality. It answers the fundamental strategic question: where is the organization relative to its stated risk tolerance?
Right, if a facility's stated goal is a zero-incident culture, but the underlying measurement reveals a 20% month-over-month increase in localized near misses involving mobile equipment.
Then the executive team knows exactly how far their reality has drifted from their objective.
The data provides a solid empirical basis for continued improvement, completely removing the guesswork from capital allocation.
It determines what progress is actually reasonable given real-world restraints. Every facility operates under severe constraints regarding time, budget, and human capital.
Measurement allows an EHS director to prioritize the deployment of those scarce resources effectively, rather than just reacting to the loudest complaint from the production floor.
Resource allocation based on actual risk is the hallmark of a mature program. To conceptualize how to measure that allocation, Chapter 36 requires us to visualize the health and safety performance management system.
It dissects effective risk control into 3 distinct hierarchical levels. This is a brilliant way to look at it.
It is a critical framework for auditing. Level 1 is defined as management arrangements.
So we're not looking at the factory floor yet.
No, we are analyzing the boardroom, the organizational chart, and the corporate treasury. The measurement question is, are the overarching management arrangements designed to ensure that downstream risk control systems can even survive?
We're auditing the structural foundation. Is there a comprehensive written safety policy? Is there a dedicated CapEx budget for hazard mitigation? Or does safety have to beg for operational scraps?
Are the reporting structures designed so that safety has a direct line to the CEO? Or is the EHS manager buried under the production manager, creating an inherent conflict of interest?
Because if level 1 is structurally flawed, the entire system below it will inevitably collapse under pressure.
Exactly. Level 1 is the corporate architecture. Then we move down to level 2, risk control systems.
This acts as the bridge between executive intent and the worker at the point of operation.
It is the basis for ensuring that adequate workplace precautions are systematically provided and maintained.
So, the boardroom might authorize a level 1 policy for confined space entry and allocate a budget for it.
But level 2 is the actual living system that trains the authorized entrance, calibrates the 4 gas monitors on a schedule, coordinates the rescue team, and archives the entry permits.
We have to measure if that specific system is breathing.
It is the operationalization of the executive intent. And finally, we descend to level 3, workplace precautions.
This is the point of risk. Are the physical, tangible precautions effective at preventing kinetic or chemical energy from transferring to a human body?
This is the granular measurement. Is the physical barrier guard properly secured to the point of operation on the lathe?
Is the local exhaust ventilation hood positioned close enough to capture the welding fumes before they enter the worker's breathing zone?
Is the shock-absorbing lanyard calculated for the correct fall clearance distance?
The text insists on a crucial point regarding these 3 levels. Answering the executive question, what is our health and safety performance, requires a holistic, balanced approach.
It has to evaluate input, process, and outcome across all 3 tiers.
Let's dissect that triad. Input, process, outcome.
Input metrics quantify the resources and energy the organization is injecting into the system. What is the ratio of EHS professionals to frontline workers? How many capital dollars were spent on engineering controls versus personal protective equipment?
Then process metrics evaluate the mechanical functioning of the systems. Are the level 2 risk control systems operating at their design frequency?
Right. Are the daily crane inspections being completed at a 95% compliance rate?
And finally, outcome metrics measure the lagging results. Did a loss of containment occur? Did a worker suffer an avulsion?
But relying solely on outcome metrics is a catastrophic mistake.
Because if an executive board only reviews the total recordable incident rate, which is a pure outcome metric, and that number is 0, they might award themselves bonuses and declare the culture a success.
But if they aren't measuring inputs and processes, that 0 might be entirely born of luck, or worse, a toxic culture of non-reporting.
A catastrophic failure could be gestating in their level 2 systems, completely undetected, ready to trigger a multi-fatality event tomorrow.
That phenomenon is exactly what preceded disasters like the Deepwater Horizon or the Texas City refinery explosion. The lagging outcome metrics looked acceptable, while the level 1 and level 2 process safety inputs were deeply corrupted.
This leads us to the core technical payload of Chapter 36, measuring the health and safety management system. The text isolates 6 specific pillars that must be rigorously measured.
These are required to ensure the system is actively converting uncontrolled hazards into managed risks.
These 6 areas are the architectural columns of a true audit process. Let's turn to the first one, policy. What constitutes a measurable policy? Because drafting a document that says safety first and hanging it in the break room is practically a cliche at this point.
It really is. The criteria here are strict. First, the policy must be codified in writing. Verbal heuristics and the way we've always done it do not constitute a policy.
Second, it must be comprehensible.
Right. If the policy is drafted by corporate counsel in dense legalese that the frontline workforce cannot decode, it fails the measurement test.
Third, it must be highly accessible. It cannot reside exclusively on a hidden intranet portal or in a locked filing cabinet. It has to be available at the point of use.
And the final criterion for the policy measurement is arguably the most critical for establishing legal and organizational authority.
It must bear the signature of the highest-ranking executive in the organization.
It requires an unequivocal, signed commitment from the CEO or site director. That signature legally binds the executive accountability we discussed earlier to the parameters of the document.
When auditing level 1, you verify these attributes. Does it exist? Is the reading level appropriate? Can a maintenance tech access it at 2 a.m. on a Sunday? Is the top executive signature physically on the page?
If the policy pillar holds up, we move to the second area to measure, organizing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We're measuring how people work together. This isn't about the cleanliness of the tool crib. It's a deep dive into organizational behavior and the friction between different departments.
When you measure organizing, you are evaluating management control and hierarchy. Are the lines of authority regarding safety clearly delineated, or is there ambiguity when production schedules clash with safety protocols?
You must measure the quality of cooperation. Are the safety representatives and the operations managers functioning in an adversarial state, or is there genuine collaborative effort?
Furthermore, you are auditing the communication matrix.
Yeah.
Does critical hazard information flow horizontally across different shifts and vertically up to the C-suite without being sanitized?
That sanitization piece is huge. Information often gets watered down as it goes up the chain.
It absolutely does. Finally, you're measuring competence. Is the organization simply checking boxes on a training roster, or are they actively verifying that employees possess the cognitive and physical competence to execute high-risk tasks safely?
A pristine policy is useless if the organization itself is highly siloed, communicative pathways are blocked, and the workforce is undertrained.
Exactly. The third pillar is planning and implementation. This circles back to the friction between identifying a hazard and actually deploying the capital to mitigate it.
Measuring planning and implementation requires a forensic look at the organization's risk assessment methodologies.
You are asking, do the HAZOps and job hazard analyses actually result in the deployment of engineering controls, or do they just result in more administrative rules?
You evaluate whether leading targets are established and met. You search for evidence of an institutionalized continuous improvement loop.
If a level 2 risk assessment identifies an ergonomic risk factor, like excessive repetition and force in an assembly process, the measurement of implementation verifies whether CapEx was actually released to install a pneumatic lift table.
And whether subsequent metrics proved a reduction in biomechanical strain, that flows directly into the fourth area.
Capability.
Capability.
Yes.
I frame this around CapEx versus OpEx resource allocation and risk mitigation. Does the organization actually possess the financial bandwidth, the human expertise, and the equipment to execute its stated policy?
Capability is a ruthless metric because it exposes an organization's true priorities. It measures whether resource allocation is mathematically based on actual risk profiles.
Yates brings up a phenomenal dynamic here. He challenges the reader to look at whether a disproportionate amount of effort and money is being burned on managing low-severity slips, trips, and falls, while highly complex, low-frequency, but high-consequence major accident hazards are starved of resources.
It is the trap of the low-hanging fruit. An organization might launch a massive, highly visible behavioral campaign about holding handrails, distributing hundreds of posters, and spending thousands of man-hours on behavioral observations.
It looks like they have immense capability.
Right, it looks great on paper. Meanwhile, out in the tank farm, a highly volatile chemical reactor relies on a corroded pressure relief valve that hasn't been subjected to a mechanical integrity inspection in 5 years because the turnaround budget was slashed.
Measuring capability forces the auditor to follow the money. Are you deploying your finite safety capital against process safety risk that could level the facility? Or are you obsessing over minor lacerations because they are easier for middle management to comprehend and track?
It's the illusion of safety versus the reality of risk. The last two measurement pillars are compliance and deployment. These sound adjacent, but they measure entirely different operational realities.
Let's break those down. Compliance is the baseline. It measures whether the organization is adhering to the absolute legal and regulatory floor.
This involves verifying strict adherence to specific OSHA standards, EPA emission limits, and local NFPA fire codes.
Are the permissible exposure limits for hexavalent chromium in the welding bays mathematically verified to be below the OSHA thresholds via industrial hygiene dosimetry?
Are the audiometric testing protocols in the hearing conservation program meeting the specific 29 CFR 1910.95 requirements? That is compliance. It is binary. You are either legally compliant or you are in violation.
Compliance asks the question, are we actively breaking the law? But compliance doesn't equal a robust safety culture. That brings in deployment.
Deployment measures the consistency and institutionalization of the safety management system across the entire geographical and operational footprint of the company.
Deployment exposes the facade. You might audit an organization's global headquarters or their flagship manufacturing plant, and it appears flawless.
The culture is dynamic, the level 1 management arrangements are fully funded, the machine guarding utilizes state-of-the-art interlocks, and compliance is absolute.
But then you traveled 200 miles to evaluate their legacy distribution center or a secondary warehouse. The secondary warehouse is always where deployment goes to die.
It really is. You walk in and it's a completely different company.
Extension cords are daisy-chained across forklift aisles. Emergency egress routes are blocked by pallets of obsolete inventory. The lockout-tagout board is covered in dust. And the site manager acts like OSHA is a myth.
That disparity represents a catastrophic failure in deployment. The measurement of deployment ensures that the robust policies, the organized communication, and the strict compliance achieved at the flagship facility are actively pushed down to every single site, every night shift, and every remote field team.
A corporate safety management system is only as resilient as its most poorly deployed location.
Evaluating those 6 pillars gives you a structural MRI of the organization. But to run those diagnostics, we need to examine what specific data points we are pulling.
Which transitions us into what I consider the absolute core of Chapter 36, the statistical and operational battle between lagging and leading indicators.
The shift from lagging to leading indicators represents the most significant evolutionary leap in modern safety management. For half a century, the safety profession navigated almost exclusively by analyzing lagging indicators.
Yates's text argues vehemently that relying on these retrospective metrics is no longer a viable strategy for advancing an organization's risk profile.
Lagging indicators are the ultimate rearview mirror. You are driving down a treacherous mountain road, and you are only navigating by looking at the guardrails you've already hit.
Table 36.1 in the text defines them precisely. They are purely retrospective. They only identify the presence of a hazard after the kinetic or chemical energy has already been released.
Lagging indicators measure failures. The most ubiquitous examples are the total recordable incident rate, the experience modification rate used for workers' compensation premiums, or the days away restricted or transferred rate.
These metrics mathematically confirm that circumstances degraded, a critical hazard manifested, a level 2 control failed, and a human being absorbed the impact.
A lagging indicator alerts the executive board that a corrective action must be engineered to prevent a subsequent similar incident.
But the data point itself was generated by someone who already suffered a fractured femur, a thermal burn, or irreversible noise-induced hearing loss.
You cannot abandon lagging indicators entirely. Regulatory bodies require them, and you must analyze your failures. However, they are a metric of systemic failure, not a metric of active prevention.
To achieve a zero-incident culture, the modern safety professional must engineer a dashboard heavily weighted with leading indicators.
If lagging is the rearview mirror, leading indicators are the high-beam headlights shining through the windshield.
I love that analogy. The text defines leading indicators as actionable, predictive, and explicitly relevant to the organization's strategic objectives.
They identify systemic degradation before the hazard fully manifests. This gives the EHS professional the temporal advantage to deploy preventative actions.
You're responding to shifting variables before the energy is released.
It fundamentally alters the organizational posture from reactive to proactive. Instead of waiting for a recordable injury to signal a systemic collapse, you measure the upstream activities that statistically predict a safe outcome.
Examples include measuring the closure rate of employee-reported near misses, tracking the percentage of line supervisors who have completed advanced hazard recognition training,
or monitoring the schedule compliance of preventative maintenance on critical process safety equipment like scrubber systems or relief valves.
If those upstream activities are executed with high fidelity, the statistical probability of a lagging incident plummets.
Building a dashboard of leading indicators sounds great in the boardroom, but you can't just invent random metrics and label them leading.
No, you definitely can't. The text establishes a rigorous litmus test for what validates an indicator. This is critical for anyone trying to construct a functional EHS dashboard that won't just produce noise.
Generating invalid data is vastly more dangerous than having no data at all, because invalid data creates a false sense of security. The litmus test has 6 non-negotiable criteria.
Let's go through them.
First, the indicator must be objective. It cannot rely on the subjective feelings or varied interpretations of different auditors. It must be a cold, measurable fact.
Second, it must be easy to measure and collect. If capturing the data point requires an EHS coordinator to spend 20 hours a week transcribing paper forms into a spreadsheet, the system will inevitably be abandoned under operational stress.
Third, the metric must be highly relevant. It must map directly to the specific risk profile of that facility.
Right. Tracking the number of safety posters hung in the break room is incredibly easy to collect and objective, but it has zero relevance to preventing a combustible dust explosion in the grinding department.
Relevancy is often where dashboards fail. Fourth, the indicator must have a quantitative basis. Even if you are attempting to measure a highly qualitative dimension like safety culture, you must engineer a way to quantify it.
You might deploy a Likert scale survey where frontline operators rate their psychological safety regarding stop work authority from 1 to 5.
That converts a qualitative feeling into a quantitative data set that can be statistically tracked over time.
Fifth, the indicator must map accurate causal linkages. You must possess a high degree of confidence that the specific leading activity you are measuring actually mitigates the specific lagging outcome you are trying to prevent.
And the sixth criterion is the operational trigger. It must prompt an appropriate response.
If a critical leading indicator, let's say, the on-time completion rate of critical safety system inspections plummets from 98% to 60% in one quarter, that data point must trigger an immediate, mandatory, and pre-planned intervention from the executive team.
If the dashboard flashes red and leadership does nothing, the metric is entirely useless.
That specific requirement leads directly into the leading indicator that David Yates explicitly highlights as his ultimate metric.
Ah, yes, this is a great one.
The percentage of safety-related work orders completed. It is a brilliant metric because it taps into the absolute core of the facility's functionality. It measures the exact friction point between safety identification and maintenance execution.
If a machine operator identifies a frayed electrical pendant on an overhead crane or a malfunctioning interlock on a CNC machine, and they take the time to submit a safety work order, that is a positive leading activity.
But the leading indicator doesn't stop at the submission of the ticket. The true metric is the cycle time and the completion percentage of those safety-specific work orders by the maintenance department.
If the frontline workforce is diligently reporting hazards, but those work orders languish in a backlog for 90 days because maintenance is exclusively focused on production uptime, the system is actively failing.
The physical hazard remains energized on the floor. Furthermore, you are aggressively destroying the psychological safety and morale of the workforce.
If an operator reports a dangerous condition and leadership ignores it for 3 months, that operator will never report a hazard again. You have effectively blinded your leading indicator system.
Tracking the life cycle of those work orders gives you an unfiltered, empirical look at the reality of the safety culture. However, Yates issues a severe caveat regarding this specific metric, one that dives deep into the normalization of deviance in human behavior.
It requires a highly cynical understanding of organizational dynamics. You must establish and fiercely guard a crystal clear definition of what actually constitutes a safety-related work order.
If the EHS department does not actively audit and gatekeep this definition, the metric will be immediately weaponized and corrupted by other departments.
I know you've seen this happen in the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool.
I have seen this exact scenario play out. A production manager is under immense pressure to hit a quarterly yield target. Their primary conveyor system starts experiencing nuisance faults, slowing down production.
They know that the maintenance department's KPIs are tied to closing safety work orders within 24 hours, while standard maintenance requests take a week.
So the production manager deliberately codes the conveyor repair as a safety-related critical work order to manipulate the system and jump the queue.
That is the exact vulnerability Yates warns about. Suddenly, repairing a squeaky door hinge in the plant manager's office or fixing a non-critical conveyor fault is coded as a critical safety intervention.
Meanwhile, the work order for the actual bypassed interlock on the stamping press gets buried under a mountain of fake safety tickets.
The leading indicator data becomes heavily corrupted, the dashboard shows a false high performance rate, and the executive team is completely blind to the mounting systemic risk.
You must measure the metric, but you must also ruthlessly audit the integrity of the data stream.
This raises an important question. Who is executing these measurements? When are they doing it? And what are the specific methodologies?
The question of who holds the measuring stick is paramount. The text exposes a terrifying reality inherent in corporate structures.
Senior management is frequently completely unaware of systemic degradation unless they are explicitly informed. Relying on a strategy of waiting to be told is organizational malpractice.
The chilling effect on reportings is massive. If a mid-level safety coordinator realizes that the facility's practice safety management protocols for highly hazardous chemicals have been neglected for a year, they know that bringing that data to the site director is going to halt production and cost millions of dollars.
The organizational pressure to remain silent, to not be the bearer of catastrophic news, is immense. So the CEO continues to assume the level 1 and level 2 systems are functioning perfectly.
That organizational silence is exactly why the measurement systems must be highly formalized and objective. You cannot rely on the individual courage of an employee to speak truth to power.
The measurement system must be engineered to trigger corrective actions automatically when leading indicators breach their control limits. Furthermore, the responsibility for measurement must be distributed across all operational levels.
It requires operators executing daily pre-use inspections on their mobile equipment, line supervisors conducting documented weekly behavioral observations,
EHS professionals executing in-depth monthly compliance audits, and independent third-party auditors conducting annual systemic reviews.
It is a defense-in-depth strategy. And this dictates when and how we measure, which the blueprint divides into proactive and reactive monitoring methodologies. Proactive monitoring is the aggressive gathering of data before the kinetic energy is released.
Proactive monitoring relies heavily on routine, structured site safety inspections. This isn't just wandering the floor, it is taking a highly specific Level 3 checklist and hunting for hazards that have bypassed normal controls.
It also requires comprehensive, quantitative surveys. This means bringing in an industrial hygienist to execute personal air sampling for respirable crystalline silica.
Or utilizing noise dosimetry to mathematically verify that your engineering controls are actually suppressing exposures below the OSHA action levels.
A massive component of proactive monitoring is the employee hazard reporting system. We discussed the work order metric, but the text emphasizes the absolute necessity of multiple, varied reporting avenues.
Different employees possess different risk tolerances for speaking up. An extroverted 20-year veteran might be perfectly comfortable halting a safety committee meeting to report a hazard.
A new hire or a contractor might be terrified of retaliation. If you want accurate, unfiltered data from the floor, you have to engineer reporting mechanisms that cater to varying psychological needs.
From anonymous digital drop boxes and QR code reporting systems to dedicated third-party voicemail hotlines.
You must lower the barrier to entry for data collection. Now, even with an elite proactive measurement system, human error and mechanical degradation dictate that incidents will occasionally occur. That is where reactive monitoring becomes necessary.
This encompasses the entire architecture of accident and near-miss investigations.
This is a concept that often trips up CSP candidates. If the incident has already occurred and the energy has been released, isn't the investigation just generating a lagging indicator? How does Yates frame an accident investigation as an active part of a measurement system?
The occurrence of the event itself generates the lagging indicator. However, measuring the quality, depth, and velocity of your organizational response to that event is a highly proactive, systemic metric.
When a high-potential near-miss occurs, does the Level 2 system immediately trigger a formal root cause analysis?
Does that RCA utilize advanced structured problem-solving methodologies like a failure modes and effects analysis or a fishbone diagram as required by the CSP Blueprint?
And most critically, does the investigation culminate in actionable, measured engineering changes that physically prevent recurrence? Or does it simply blame the worker and mandate more training?
Measuring the rigorousness of your reactive investigations is a critical gauge of your safety culture's maturity.
It measures whether the organization is actually capable of learning from its failures. And this concept provides a seamless bridge from Chapter 36, which establishes the theory and philosophy of measurement, directly into Chapter 37, which dissects the actual auditing tools used to extract this data from the real world.
Chapter 37 transitions the professional from the theoretical mandate of we must measure deployment to the tactical reality of here is the specific instrument we will use to measure it.
The auditing chapter heavily emphasizes the use of job hazard analyses, or JHAs, not just as planning documents, but as active measurement tools.
An auditor will take a completed JHA for a complex task, like entering a permit-required confined space, stand on the floor, and objectively measure the worker's physical actions against the written standard operating procedure.
Are they actually utilizing the prescribed non-sparking tools? Are they continuously monitoring the atmosphere at the correct stratification levels? It pulls the policy off the paper and measures it in 3 dimensions.
The text also places immense value on employee interviews during the audit process. Document reviews will only tell you what the organization wants to be. Employee interviews reveal what the organization actually is.
A compliance checklist can verify that a fire extinguisher is hydrostatically tested and fully charged, but a confidential interview with a frontline operator will tell you if they would actually feel empowered to use it or if they fear being reprimanded for discharging it.
Yates suggests aggressively interviewing hourly employees to gauge their perception of management's commitment. For example, an auditor should ask the floor operators if the plant manager and the engineering staff actually don the required safety glasses, hearing protection, and steel-toed boots when they walk out of the office and onto the production floor.
Or if management behaves as though the physics of a hazard do not apply to their pay grade.
That specific interview question is the ultimate litmus test for both Level 1 management arrangements and the deployment pillar.
If the CEO signed a pristine policy declaring that personal protective equipment is universally mandatory, but the audit interview reveals that the site leadership routinely walks the floor without hard hats, your measurement system just successfully identified a catastrophic failure in organizational accountability.
Discovering that systemic failure through a structured audit interview is infinitely preferable to having OSHA discover it during a post-fatality investigation.
So what does this all mean? We have spent this deep dive dissecting the highly complex, interconnected universe of Chapter 36. We've navigated the failures of the Deming cycle, the hierarchical reality of the 3 levels of risk control, the critical transition from lagging to leading indicators, and the psychological realities of auditing.
Whether you are a practitioner aggressively preparing for the rigorous CSP exam, a corporate director attempting to allocate capital to reduce systemic risk, or simply a professional fascinated by the mechanics of organizational behavior, the core takeaway is absolute.
Good intentions, perfectly written policies, and massive safety budgets do not inherently save lives. Only meticulously measured, strategically deployed, and relentlessly monitored systems have the power to control kinetic and chemical energy. Drucker's law remains undefeated. You absolutely cannot manage what you do not measure.
It is the unforgiving reality of the EHS profession. As we conclude this analysis, I want to present a final philosophical concept for you to consider, extrapolating from the core principles we've discussed today.
Lay it on us.
We have spent an hour detailing the critical necessity of shifting organizational focus from lagging outcomes to predictive, leading indicators, identifying and neutralizing hazards long before the energy is released.
Right.
We also analyzed the heavy emphasis the CSP Blueprint places on Domain 1, specifically the concept of prevention through design. This is the engineering philosophy of designing hazards completely out of a process.
Substituting a highly toxic solvent for an aqueous one, or designing equipment that requires zero at-height maintenance before the facility's blueprints are even finalized. Eliminating the hazard at the architectural level, so the risk never even physically manifests in the real world.
Precisely. Consider this provocative trajectory. If the EHS profession fully matures, if we perfectly master the deployment of predictive leading indicators, and if we flawlessly execute prevention through design across every industrial sector, what happens to the safety professional?
That's a fascinating thought.
If a safety management system is measured with such microscopic precision and optimized so flawlessly that all hazards are engineered out and all variables are controlled before they can interact, the ultimate metric of a safety professional's success might be complete, absolute silence.
It would be an environment characterized by a total absence of recordable incidents, an absence of near misses, and an absence of the need for any active-reactive interventions.
The ultimate pinnacle safety professional of the future might be the one who is entirely invisible, a professional who seemingly has absolutely nothing to react to because their entire existence is dedicated to the silent, frictionless measurement of a perfectly optimized system.
Designing a systemic architecture so flawless that you measure yourself entirely out of a reactive job, leaving behind only the quiet, continuous hum of a perfectly safe operation. That is the ultimate objective to strive for. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on the QHSE Talks channel. We hope this rigorous exploration into the mechanics of measuring safety performance has equipped you with new analytical tools and a sharper perspective on your own systems. Keep questioning your data, keep measuring what actually matters, and most importantly, keep learning. We will see you on the next deep dive.